Hello, Glenn.
Hi, Ola.
Nice to have you here. Could you introduce yourself to our
Sure,
audience and our viewers?
sure. I'd love to. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show today. It's nice to be here. My name's Glenn Poulos. Originally from Canada. I actually live in Florida now. And you know, essentially, I went into sales in around 1985. I used to be a government worker, and it didn't really fit in with my sort of what I wanted to do, and so my boss suggested I get a job in sales, and so in 1985, I jumped into the world of sales, and by 1991, I realized there was lots of opportunities if you own the sales company versus worked at the sales company. So I started my first company in 1991. Grew it for 15 years. I was able to sell the business, and then I was able, shortly thereafter, I was able to start another company, similar but different. Ran that company for 15 years. And in 2022, I sold that to a private equity firm in Washington, and I worked for them for 3 years, which ended on New Year's Eve of last year, 2024. And with that, I changed industries, I changed countries, I changed markets, I changed everything. I moved to Florida, bought a small business, and I'm running it from Orlando and getting away from the cold up in Canada. And that's sort of where I've been. So I'm on my third sales company. And this one I didn't start from scratch. I bought a business. The owner was retiring. And now I'm just seeing if I can grow it a bit while I head closer to retirement. I'm still too young to retire. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment.
I bought a business too in
Oh, nice.
2020, from some people that were retiring as well. So I like when we buy businesses like that because then you don't have to start from the scratch.
Yeah,
You could
exactly.
build on what somebody has already built. And I think there's so much opportunity with baby boomers, especially in Canada, retiring. And over the next few years, I think there's so much opportunity for businesses of baby boomers to be acquired. I usually tell people you can position yourself that way instead of starting from the scratch.
Exactly. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, yeah. And so, Glenn, you are the author of the book Never Sit in the Lobby. And I wanted to, so why this book? Tell us about it.
So yeah, so never sit in the lobby. So the title came from one of the chapters, and so the it's never sit in the lobby. 57 factors to build a career in sales and business, and so it's essentially my 57 top rules on what to do, what not to do. Right, one of them is never sit in the lobby, and so the book came out of all the lessons I learned from all the mentors I'd accumulated along the way jumping into sales. And I notice a lot of people doing things right. I notice a lot of people doing things wrong. And over the years, I started to write down some of those rules. And I would try to make up some funny stories so that I could both remember the rules and then share them with other people, and they'd be memorable. And over the years, people would ask me to share them, come and talk about them, and suggest that, oh, you should write a book. And I never actually sat down and did it until the pandemic, when I had nothing else to do in Canada. We were locked down for quite some time, and I thought, hey, what better time now on the weekends while I have not much else to do, can't go anywhere. And so I buckled down for about 9 months, and I got the book down on paper, and I published it the same month that I sold my company too. So it was kind of February 2022 was a big month for me. It's sort of in my life. I published my book and I sold my company. And yeah, and so it's for anyone that wants to learn about sales, all sorts of other business tips, and also just tips on being a pleasure to be around, being a pleasure to do business with, and which is really important to me.
I would like you to talk about sales because most people are uncomfortable with sales. Like, oh, I don't want to be that person that's nagging people. But some people are very good at it, which I know you are. You have written so much about sales. to somebody listening, how do you, if you have something to offer people, how do you do that without coming on like you are a nuisance, like you are disturbing people?
Yeah, good one. And that's kind of like one of the reasons for the book too, right? Is that the subtitle of the book is how to get, act, and stay in front of your customers and to be a pleasure to do business with always, right? And so you had said, how do you not be a nuisance or something like that, right? Well, the number one rule is don't be a nuisance, right? Like just don't be one. And so, that's where I came into learning little tips and techniques about being more pleasurable and more natural and to build natural rapport with people, right? But first thing, when people are like, oh, I'm too scared, or, it's daunting to think about going into sales or something. Well, then I try to shift their mindset into saying that, like selling equals helping, right? It's not slick, fast talking salespeople. The best salespeople are the ones that can identify and solve your problems. And your job is to find the customers, the right, solution for the customer's problem that you've identified correctly. And you do that by explaining to these new people that are scared of being in sales that you have to start by listening, right? Sales is more about listening than talking. God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. So you do the math, right? And that's what I always tell everybody, right? And so you always want to be listening more than you're speaking. And and if you truly join a company where you love the product and you learn that product inside and out, it becomes an exciting thing to be able to share these products with people, and it becomes a much more natural thing than if I took a job selling Kirby vacuums door to door. That would be probably something I wouldn't enjoy doing, right? I don't really care about the product, although the Kirby vacuum is actually a very good vacuum. No, I don't want to cast any aspersions on the Kirby because it's quite a good machine, but I wouldn't want to go door to door selling it, right? But if you love certain types of products, software, services, equipment, whatever you're selling, you have to love the product and learn the product. And then you're really just sharing, your excitement around the product with other people, right? And you want to make sure you're practicing so that you're comfortable with what you're doing. That's another key. Practice makes comfortable, is I like to say, right? And yeah, so those are some. There's more about rejection. Rejection is just another path on the way to your first success, right? They're not all going to buy from you. And there'll be the law of averages. If every 6 or 7 or 9 or 10 people buy, the faster you get through the no's, you get to your yes, right?
And I think that's very important, that rejection path, for people
Yeah.
to know that people are going to reject you. And I like the way you said, the faster you get through the rejections, the faster you get to your yes. So,
Yeah.
because the rejection is really the pain. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think anybody likes being rejected. So that
No.
can be very painful. And that's why people don't like sales. Like, I would rather
Yeah.
do something that wouldn't, entail being rejected every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but getting to that sweet spot where you have found your yeses, if I can say, is
Right.
the challenge, right? Yeah. I admire salespeople that make it so, as you say, like they are helping people, like they're solving a problem. Then they're not sounding salesy, so to speak.
Yeah.
Are your finances like a messy pile of papers scattered across a table? You don't know where to start and it feels so overwhelming. Imagine if someone could organize those papers into labeled folders, making it easier for you to take action at the moment that it's needed. Look, you might feel disorganized about money, even ashamed to talk about it. If you would rather feel in control about money, connect with us at wealthedge.ca. That's wealthedge-ed.ca. So
Exactly.
most products that people sell, people know the benefit of those products. And you said in one of the things you say that I'm just reading my notes here, that it's not enough to know only the benefit of a product. You have to tap into the raw emotion to seal the deal. Let's speak more about that, how to tap into that raw emotion, how to seal the deal. Going above and beyond what the product or the service can do. How do people do that?
Essentially, the people really don't buy the product just because of the benefits. They buy the product because of the way the features and benefits make them feel. Right. And so, so there's kind of analogies that are required to get across the point. Right. But the simple way of thinking of it was, if you've got a young guy who just graduated, university or something, and he needs a new car, and then you've got, a young family and the mom needs a new vehicle and she has a baby. And you take them and you offer the mom, like a sports car, right? 2-seater, tiny, cramped, low to the ground, small trunk. And then you offer the young fellow coming out of college, a minivan, right? Like, you can easily understand how that would make them feel, right? The mom with a baby and a carriage and a car seat and all that, that family's going to want the minivan, right? And it makes them feel safe and comfortable, and gives them access and comfort to get from point A to point B in an easy and manner, in a safe way. The young guy wants to feel cool, look cool, and so you're not really selling them that the car is fast. You're selling to them how the car is going to make them feel driving fast, right? And so that's the way you need to tap into people's emotions. And so, for instance, maybe you're selling a factory something that's going to make products come out 10 times, not 10 times, but say like 20% faster. Right. And so, you can then say, hey, you can now reinvest in other product lines and other things because your people can be redeployed on other projects because you're now producing quicker and faster. And so, how are you going to feel when when you're churning out 20% more profit, that kind of a thing. Right. And so that's what I mean by tapping into their emotions. And you have to figure out, what it is they really need and the problem that you're solving, and then try to get to the point of how you think they'll feel having solved the problem, and then show them how they would feel. And then that's tapping into their emotions, get them to that spot in the cycle, right? And that's the picture you're trying to paint them. And when you're selling, how do you generate true rapport? Right. And a lot of and I talk about and explain in the book about people that try to generate fake rapport, right? Like they try to pretend that they know you. They're overly familiar when it's not appropriate, right? And sometimes when people like, we've all been sold to at times, right? And you can tell when someone's trying to be like overly familiar, right? Like, and maybe they're asking about your family before it's appropriate, right? It's like, I'm running a company, I'm running a production line, I don't really want to talk about my kid's baseball game, right? Like that's for later, right? That kind of a thing. So you want to be always working towards genuine rapport. You always want to be listening more than you're talking, right? And you digging for to figure out and put yourself in the customer's shoes, right? And I always tell people, learn what empathy, sympathy, and compassion mean, and the definitions of each one, and learn when to apply each one, right? And so because and in addition to that, you want to learn how to practice active listening, right? And active listening is, there's many tips and tricks. There's a bunch of exercises in the book on how to do it, but it's where you're not offering solutions in the middle of someone's sentence. Like sometimes, like especially for men, right? When they go home after work, maybe their wife's all stressed out about something and she's blah, 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 this and that and whatever. And you're like, oh, don't worry, it's not a big deal. We'll solve it and whatever. She doesn't want you to say that. Right? Like she doesn't want your solution to her problem at that moment. At that moment, she probably just needs to vent. Or maybe you had a bad day and you come home and, you don't want her to say, oh, don't worry, you're the best salesman, don't, it's all, you just want her to listen, let you get it off your chest and move on. And that through active listening, you can offer that kind ear, right? And so some of the other ways where you want to build rapport, like not trash talking your competitors, not make it, because I mean they may have bought 10 of the competitors before you figured it out, and then you're like, what am I, an idiot? Like, so kind of thing, right? And when people reject you for reasons that are beyond your control, which is definitely going to happen, you don't want to get emotional. That's where you can become a pleasure to do business with, because, like, for instance, I sold to big companies that bought from me more than once, right? It wasn't like one and done. It wasn't like I had one thing to sell, I sold it once, and then I went away and never came back. I was selling products that evolved over the years, and I would go back to the same big companies, big technology companies, over and over and over again. There's thousands of people that work there. I'd call on hundreds of people. And so I'm going to get rejected at times. And I want to make sure that next time they need to buy something that's in my scope of products, that they're going to want to call me back. They're not like, oh, the last time we rejected that guy, he went crazy. And, he called my boss and he tried to get me, embarrassed and say I was making a mistake. And, so you don't want to get emotional about rejection. You want to learn how to lose gracefully. And as I like to say, you want to learn how to lose quickly and figure out the deals you can win and the deals you won't win. And when you figure out a deal you won't win, you want to move on quickly. You don't want to fight to the bitter end when you know you're not going to win. You're better to quickly excuse yourself from that deal and find the next deal where you have a better chance of winning. And because you're just wasting time, and coming in second, you're still a loser, right? And sorry to say it that way, but you still lost. And I mean, I'd rather come in last, meaning I left early, and let the other people fight it out, and I go find a new customer, right? That's one of my magic rules that I always follow, And yeah, so those are some of the ways I use to generate and establish rapport and being genuine with customers.
Does that apply to businesses as well? I have started many companies, and sometimes I'm wondering, is this going to work? Glenn, sometimes I think to myself, I heard, for example, I've heard stories of like Tyler Perry. I don't know if you know Tyler Perry. Was
Oh yeah, of
talking
course.
about
Yeah.
his story of how he was sleeping at at the back of his car before he made his big breakthrough. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think he said it took 7 years, and sometimes his mom had to give him something like money to get by, to buy food. And I was thinking those 7 years must have been horrible. Then I have heard similar stories of people that have now made it, that went through a very hard time. How do you know when to move on? How do you know, especially when it comes to businesses? This show is for business people, especially people that are just starting their businesses, or professionals that are doing side hustles and all those kind of things.
Right.
Yeah. So how do people know when to move on? Because I like what you said.
Okay, so taking it first from being like a salesperson and then a business. So from a salesperson, you kind of know, you should instinctively know, right? Like when you walk in, for instance, you're selling Cadillac level products and they're using, budget level equipment, and you're misaligned, right? It's not the right product, right? Or you have a budget product, they're buying the Cadillac, you're not in the right space. They may there may be software or hardware incompatibilities with your product, and it's like, they've already got 9 of my competitors' product and they want a 10th product. Why would they buy mine? They probably just want me to keep the competitor honest and give them a good price, right? And so these are things you can see instinctively, and why would you fight it out? You may realize that you're, like I said, too expensive or too cheap, don't meet the specifications, don't do the job. And by qualifying the customer correctly up front, you should realize when you can win and when you should win. And if you shouldn't win, you probably won't win, right? And it would require too much time, and so at that moment, when you realize unequivocally that you're not going to win, and that moment will come. Sometimes it's very close to the end, but if it comes early, then leave early, right? Be nice about it, but just gently pull back your resources, right? Like, for instance, let's say, hey, we're looking at 5 companies. We want to do a bake-off. We want your equipment installed for like 2 weeks. And you're not going to win. Then what you say is, and they say, and we want to do it next week, right? Or in 2 weeks. And we say, oh, it's too bad. My equipment's booked from April 15th through April, 30th, or April through May. And, I won't be able to do that till June. And they're like, well, June's no good for us. We're not going to be able to look at your product. Oh, really? That's too bad. And then because your equipment would be better served in being installed at a different place, right? Or being trialed at a different place with all your people helping them to learn it, or whatever it is, you're not going to win. So why would you waste all of your staff's time, right? And so that's when you're a salesperson, right? When you're a business owner, it's a little bit different, right? Once you've made the leap and now you're a business owner, like for Tyler Perry, he's like a creative guy and, movies and, creative stuff, right? And for him, it's kind of like a calling and a passion. And, so to do it for 7 years, I mean, it's understandable, but it's different than, trying to start a company, doing home improvement or something like that, right? Like he's a very special case, right? So the normal person, you need to, when you want to take that leap, you want to know to yourself that you've got an 18-month runway. This is the kind of the way I always think about it, an 18-month runway where you're not going to starve or be homeless. Right. So, you either need to have the money in the bank if you're alone, or if you have a family, your spouse needs to be working to the point where they can support you for 18 to maybe 24 months. You think it's going to take 3 months, but trust me, it's going to take 5 times longer. And so you need to know that you can feed and clothe and, yourself for 18 months. Right. And then at that point, if you realize that, there's not incremental gains being had, you really need to question your business plan and what have you, right? Like, you can't expect, in most cases, unless you have a significant source of funding or whatever, to operate for like up to 7 years waiting for the big break, right? There needs to be something magical, like an invention, or right. But if it's just a standard business, selling insurance, selling software, selling hardware, equipment, IT, whatever it is, you need to figure out a way of getting it towards profitability by the 18-month mark, in my opinion, where you're no longer a burden on the rest of the world to feed you, right? That's kind of the rule that I follow. And how I would approach it. And that's a good reason why oftentimes you're better to try to buy a business and grow it than to start it from scratch. Because when you start from scratch, you not only have to have the right product that meets the market needs and is awesome and whatever, you need the customers, and you don't have them. And all those customers, someone's already taken care of them, right? So you have to win them. And in addition to that, you got to set up your banking, your insurance, your accounting systems, ERP, all your, do you need an office? Do you need people? Do you need staff and accounting people? And who's doing that? And who are your salespeople, et cetera, right? If you buy a small business, all that's done. The business numbers or tax numbers are in place. All your operating certificates are in place. Your insurance is in place. Your banking relationships are in place. Your product lines are there. Your job, come in, improve them all, improve the marketing, improve the website, check the salespeople out, make sure they're the best, right? And that's why on my 3rd time, instead of starting from scratch, like I did in 2007 and 1991, this time I bought a business with 10 people. It had existing customers. It's actually been in business 20 years. So this year we're celebrating our 20. So I bought it, last year. Now I can say I'm celebrating my 20th year, right?
Right.
And yeah, so that's some of my thoughts on when to know to, when to go and when to pull the plug, right?
That's very good. And I bet that's very useful to a lot of people, including myself. And you said in your, your book that I read some part of it. You said never fax the facts. Yeah, so I do like you to talk, speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, right. And there's a part with a little bit of a swear word, the second part of that, which you're not saying, so I won't repeat it. But it's not that bad of a word. But it's never I won't say it. Don't worry. Never fax the facts and never ship the S blank 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 T. Right. Never fax the facts. Never ship the right. And so it's, of course, I made it up in the 80s, right? And when we had fax machines, and in 85, when I took the job, we didn't have a fax machine. So when someone said, I want a quote, you would literally, we would type it on that NCR paper, which had 3 plies to it. When you typed on it, it made 3 copies, right? And one was, one you sent to the customer, and then you had 2 other copies for the office, whatever, right? NCR triplicate paper, right? And so when someone said, I want a quote, we would literally type it out and put it in the mail, right? You had like a week to get a guy a quote in the 80s. That's crazy, right? And then one day the fax machine came out, and the next day everyone had a fax machine, right? And so someone would say, just fax me a quote. And so what went from having a week to do something went to like 5 minutes. It's like, type my quote, send it to me by fax. I want it now. Right. And I mean, it only got worse a few years later when we all got email, because now it's like, oh, send me an email. Right. But the rule that I learned was that it's a golden opportunity when someone asks you for a piece of information. This is for people that make sales calls, right? Like these rules, right? Is like someone says, I need a quote, send me the literature. You say, oh, okay, you want the literature? No problem. It's funny because I'm going to be in your area on Thursday. And can I drop it off? Oh, I'm really busy. That's fine. I'll just drop it in the lobby for you. And, and so now you've got a way to make a sales call, right? And they've given you an in. They said they were too busy, but they still said it's okay to come by, right? So you get there and then you hit the reception, or you get one of those phones, and, the reception says, well, is he expecting you? And we go, yeah, he asked for this literature. And so the receptionist will call up and say, hey, Bob, Glenn's in the lobby. He's got that literature that you wanted. And he remembers, oh, yeah, right, Glenn, the literature, blah, blah, blah. And he forgot that he told me that he was too busy. And 99% of the time, he'll walk down to see me, right? And so that's why I never fax the facts, because now I can give them the brochure. And I said, hey, can I get 2 seconds for you to flip through it? What do you think? Does this look like? And then I say, hey, maybe can I get a little mini tour of where you're going to use the equipment? And a mini tour is a tour that's mini, right? I just want to have a quick look around. And that's one of my other rules that's in the book. Always ask for a mini tour, because once you get behind the door of the lobby, then you can see how they're running their company, right? And you can see where the equipment would be used, what competitors, are they using, are they carrying coffee mugs from your number one competitor, or the mouse pads on the people's desks are from another competitor, or, you get a lot of information walking through that building and learning where they're going to go, right? And so that's why I never fax the facts. I use everything as an opportunity to drop it off. Now, if I'm in Toronto and the customer's in LA, I'm obviously not going to drop it off, right? I would email the thing. But I mean, do whatever you can to move towards the most, sort of intimate, contact method, right? Like, for instance, oh, give me a call. And I say, well, why don't I set up a Teams? And then I can get on video, right? And I can see the reactions. But again, I can only see their face. I can't see what's on their desk. They may be holding a proposal from, my number one competitor, getting ready to sign it, right? That's why I always, and if they ask for equipment, never ship the stuff, right? Never ship it, right? So if someone asks for it, hand deliver it, show them what it is, show them how to use it. And whatever, for instance, let's say, can you bring your box, your product for us to look at and evaluate? No problem. I got to drop it off on Thursday. They're like, oh no, just ship it in. No, I'm sorry, for liability purposes, we need to drop it off and set it up. Right. And they're like, oh, okay, fine. Right. So then now you can get in, you can get to the spot and you can meet the people, and you say, how long do you need it for? And they're like, oh, we need it for about a week. Oh, a week. I could say, no, you can't leave it for a week. I said, this is far too busy. whatever time they ask for, I always split it in half. So if they say 2 weeks, I say I can leave it a week. I'll be back next week and I'll pick it up. And, if it's a week, I'll give them 2 to 3 days, right? Because whenever people are evaluating things, they actually only evaluate it for the first few minutes when you drop it off and the last few minutes when they're picking it up. It's very hard to get them to engage. And really, it all becomes a process, and a lot of times about them going through the motions to prove to buy the one they want to buy. And that's what you try to build, that emotion earlier in our conversation, having them want your benefits because of how it's going to make them feel, right? And you got to get that instrument in there, demonstrate the feeling, and get it out before they realize that you only can have 20 feet of paper tape instead of 40 feet of paper tape. And you have to change the paper tape twice a day instead of every week, right? Like you want to, because you don't want to unsell yourself, right? So,
Right.
And these are all the 57 tips that I sort of go over, and all the rules I learned by missing deals, losing deals over time, right? So,
Yeah, that's very good. How can people get the book?
So you can just go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble, Chapters, Indigo, any bookstore. You can go to my website, click on the links, glennpoulos.com. And if they want to, communicate with me directly, they can just go to LinkedIn. I'm very, very active on LinkedIn, and easy to talk to and easy to get a hold of. And yeah, I'd love for anyone to get a copy of the book. But if you have a simple question, just send me a message on LinkedIn.
That's very good to know. Listen, Glenn, it's been so good. I have learned so much. Is there anything, we haven't covered that you like to tell people?
So I'll share my golden rule, which is, it's in the book, but it's called, you only get forever to make another impression. And it's like, no, that's not the rule. You're mixing it up. My mom told me I have to make a good first impression. And I'm like, yep, your mom was exactly right. And so my mom said the same thing. But every impression you make is another first impression. And so whenever you're at work, you're starting your career, especially for young people, this is golden. And there's a story in the book about this, right? It's like, you want to always be the highest looking performer when the people that can control your career walk by, right? You never want to be a bad look, and never want to have a bad look. So in other words, like, don't install social media on your work computer because you're bored and you want to flip back and forth between your job and your Facebook, right? Like, do not do that, right? Because lo and behold, the big boss is going to walk by when you're on Facebook, and then a week later it might happen again. You're a bum, right? You always want to be working on the deal when you hear people walking around by you, and you always want to be demonstrating your best foot forward in every interaction. What happens is that as you grow through your career, people will retire, they'll go to other jobs, and opportunities will present themselves, right? You start when you're like 20 something, then you're 25, then the senior sales guy or whatever quits, right? Well, who are we going to make the senior sales guy for the big account? Well, Glenn's the one, he's always on. That guy's always on, right?
Yeah.
You get that job, right? Then you become the director of sales, the VP of sales, the CRO, right? And then eventually, you know so much about the business, and the CEO loves you so much, he retires, 20 years later, and you get the CEO job. And the way the guy that went from the warehouse to the CEO, and it's happened, there's lots of stories on the internet, at big companies where that's happened, is because the person always treated every impression as a first impression, and it was a good one.
Great. Every impression, treat it
Yeah.
as the first impression.
Yeah.
That way you're ready for opportunities all the time.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Glenn. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome, Ola. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.